Chapter 5 Sisters. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This reading by Lucy Burgoyne. Sisters by Ada Cambridge. Chapter 5. Dinner was over. They had all gone up to the big drawing room, which was the feature of the new part, the third house of the series, which now made one. The new part was incongruously solid and modern, with a story, comprising the drawing room and its staircase only, which overtopped the adjacent roofs. Below it was a corresponding dining room, and both apartments were furnished richly in the fashion of the time, tons of solid mahogany in the latter, and a pasture of grass-green carpet and brocade upholsterings in the former, lit up with gilded wall-paper and curtained cornices as by rays of a pale sun. Curly rosewood sofas and armchairs, and marbled and mirrored chiffoniers, and the like, were in such profusion upstairs as to do away with the air of bleakness common to a right-angled chamber of a large size and middle-class arrangement. A fine grand piano stood open in a prominent place. 4 large shaded lamps and 4 piano candles pleasantly irradiated the whole, while 3 French windows opening on a balcony still stood wide to the summer night. By the great white marble mantelpiece, under the great gilt-framed pier glass, filling the huge chair specially dedicated to his use, Father Pennycuick sat in comfortable gossip with his old friend, Thornycroft of Bundaboo. It irked him to separate himself from pipe and newspaper, baggy coat and slouchy slippers, and his corpulent frame objected to stairs. But when he had guests he considered it his duty to toil up after them, in patent shoes and dining costume, and sit amongst them until music or card games were on the way, when he would retire as unobtrusively as his size and heavy footstep permitted. It was the custom to pretend not to see or hear him go, and it would have annoyed him exceedingly had anyone bidden him good night. The pair talked shop, after the manner of old squatters when they sit apart, but the tall, spare, grey man, with the thoughtful face, more like a soldier than a sheep farmer, was not thinking much of his flocks and herds. His thoughts followed the direction of his quiet eyes, focused upon an amber silk gown and its immediate surroundings. Mr Thornycroft was Deborah's godfather, and at 47 was to all the sisters quite an elderly man, a sort of bachelor uncle to the family, one with no concern in such youthful pastimes as love-making and marrying, except as a benevolent onlooker and present giver, and so the veiled vigilance of his regard was not noticed, as it would not have been understood by anybody. But other eyes, similarly occupied, were plainer to read. Jim Urquhart's, of course. Jim, as ineligible for the most coveted post in the Western District as he well could be, by reason of family already depending upon him, together with the load of debt left along with it by his deceased father, a pal of Mr Pennycuick's in the gay and good old times, still contrived to bring himself within the radius of Deborah's observation whenever occasion served. And being there, although silent and keeping to the background, his gaze followed her as the gaze of an opossum follows a light on a dark night, with the same still absorption. Nothing but her returning gaze could divert it from its mark. It was so natural, so calmly customary, so unobtrusive that nobody cared to attach importance to it. He sat now, far back against the green brocade hangings of a corner window, where he could see the beloved profile in the middle of the room. His big, work-roughened hands clasped his big, bony knees, and his long, loose body hung forward out of the little chair that was never built for such as he, and he seemed given over to Rose Pennycuick's tale of the pony that had corns, and the cat that had been mangled in a cruel rabbit trap. He gave her wise counsel regarding the treatment of these poor things, his deep, drawling voice, an unnoticed instrument in the orchestra of tongues, but his crude-featured, sunburnt face held itself steadily in the one direction. From the day that he came to manhood his soul had kept the same attitude towards the woman to whom the profile belonged, but he never alluded to the fact, save in this silent way. Then there was the Reverend Bennet Goldsworthy, Church of England minister, as his style and title ran. Privately Mr. Pennycuick did not like him, but for the sake of the priestly office and as being a parishioner, he gave him the freedom of the house, and much besides. The parson's buggy never went empty away. Redford hams, vegetables, poultry, butter and eggs, etc., kept his larder supplied. His horse feed was derived therefrom, also his horse, also his cow. When his cow began to fail, he promptly mentioned the fact. He was mentioning it now to Mary Pennycuick. Yes, he was saying, apropos of his motherless little girl, whom he often brought to Redford for change of air, leaving her to the care of the sisters until convenient to him to reclaim her. Yes, it will mean much to my child in after life to have the refining influences of this house at the most impressionable age. Truth was that Ruby was growing a little old for her kindergarten, and he wanted Redford to offer her, gratis of course, a share in Francie's governess. I could not endure to see her grow up like the daughters of so many of my brother clergy, ignorant of the very rudiments of decent life, meaning not decent life in the ordinary acceptation of the term, but the life that included evening dress and finger glasses. She has caught the colonial accent already at that horrid school. "When is the new Keogh comin'?" says he. "And by the way, that reminds me, your good father promised me the cow a fortnight ago. The one we have gives us hardly any milk for the table. We have had no butter from her for months." "I am so sorry," grieved Mary, as if Redford had failed in its sacred duty of hospitality. "I will tell him about it. The men have all been so busy with the shearing." She was also distressed that she could not definitely invite Ruby for the impending holidays, but Deb had issued her commands that Redford was not to be saddled with a nurseless child at Christmas, when everybody's hands would be full. Mary was Ruby's willing foster mother when Redford had her in charge. She was also the kindest hostess of them all to Ruby's father. To her was left the task of entertaining him, and she never neglected it. Naturally, he gave her no thanks. When he said that what Ruby needed was a mother's tender care, it was at Deborah he looked, who never turned a hair's breadth in his direction at any time, except when good manners obliged her, and who was not tender to Ruby, whom she called that brat, and had smartly spanked on several occasions. A beautiful woman cannot help having objectionable lovers any more than a king can help a cat looking at him. This man, a most well-meaning, good-hearted, useful little underbred person, typical of so large a class in the